Some stories are too strange to believe, and some places are too cursed to forget. I didn't realize that when I met the map collector, a jittery man who seemed to hoard secrets in the same way he hoarded old maps. His shop was a dusty, dim place tucked into a forgotten corner of town, and though it was filled with yellowed, curling maps, none were like the one he showed me that night. I had been in his shop a few times, more for conversation than business. He was eccentric, but he had an encyclopedic knowledge of strange and lost places. One night, over tea that tasted oddly metallic, I mentioned I was looking for something unusual, something different. That's when he leaned in, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of a man who knows something no one else does. "Have you ever heard of Black Hollow?" I hadn't, and I told him so. His grin widened, but his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with a key, unlocking a drawer in his cluttered desk. From it, he pulled out an ancient, weathered map. "This," he said, spreading the map across the table, "is the only map left that shows Black Hollow. It's not on any official records. Not anymore. But it existed once." I leaned in, looking at the small dot on the map, deep within a forest I had never heard of. "What happened to it?" His smile faded, and for a moment, he looked genuinely frightened. "Some say it was abandoned. Others say it vanished erased. But those who tried to find it..." He hesitated. "They don't come back. I should have left it alone." But there was something about that map, something about the look in his eyes, that drew me in. I had to know more. I couldn't stop thinking about Black Hollow. The more I tried to push it from my mind, the more it gnawed at me. I spent days poring over old records, but just as the map collector had warned, there was no trace of the town in any official documents. It was as if it had never existed. Finally, after weeks of research and growing obsession, I decided to go. I packed my bag with supplies, took a compass, and, of course, the map. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. How could I explain that I was chasing a ghost town? The drive took me several hours, winding through country roads that grew narrower and more desolate the closer I got to the forest. Eventually, I reached a dirt path that my car could no longer traverse. I parked, grabbed my bag, and set off on foot. The forest was dense, ancient. The trees towered above me, their twisted branches blocking out most of the sunlight. It felt as though I had stepped into another world, one where time had slowed to a crawl. The air was thick, damp, and eerily quiet. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I followed the map, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. Every now and then, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting between the trees. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just trees, dense and suffocating. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to stretch on forever. But then, finally, I saw it, a clearing up ahead. My pulse quickened. This was it. I had found Black Hollow. Stepping into the clearing was like stepping into another dimension. The forest had been unnaturally quiet, but the town. The silence was oppressive, almost tangible. The buildings were still standing, but they felt wrong. They leaned at strange angles, as if time had warped them. The air was thick with dust, so thick that it seemed to hang suspended, unmoving. The town square lay before me, deserted but eerily intact. There were no signs of life, no birds, no insects, no animals. It was as if sound itself had been banished from this place. I wandered the streets, passing homes and shops, all in various states of decay. Some looked as though they had been abandoned overnight, with dishes still set on the tables and furniture in place, but others had collapsed entirely, their walls crumbling into heaps of rubble. The dust wasn't just on the ground, it was everywhere, clinging to the air, The walls, and the windows, like it was part of the very fabric of the town. Something felt off. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was deeper, more insidious. It pressed in on me from all sides, making my skin crawl. I called out, hoping for an answer, but my voice seemed to vanish before it even left my lips. As I wandered further into the town, I spotted an old house at the far end of the street. It stood out from the others tall, with narrow windows and a door slightly ajar. The moment I saw it, I knew I had to go inside. The door creaked open with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Inside, the house was frozen in time. Dust covered every surface, but it was more than just neglect. It was as if the house had been sealed in a bubble, untouched by the passage of years. The furniture was still in place, chairs around a table, a rocking chair in the corner, an old clock on the mantel. The air was heavy, thick with a feeling I couldn't quite place, like the weight of too many forgotten memories. I stepped further in, my feet leaving faint impressions in the dust on the floor. As I moved through the rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then, I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Just the dust, swirling lazily in the still air. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight. At the end of the hallway, I found a bedroom. The door was ajar, and inside, lying on a small bed, was a woman. She was perfectly still, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Her skin was pale, her face expressionless, but she wasn't dead. There was something about her, something wrong. Her chest didn't rise and fall with breath, but she wasn't decayed. She was frozen, caught in some kind of stasis. A chill ran down my spine as I approached her, my heart pounding in my chest. I whispered her name, though I didn't know why. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Didn't move. But then, I heard it, a faint whisper, like a breath of air brushing past my ear. "The silence takes you slowly." I jerked back, heart racing. The voice wasn't hers. It was coming from everywhere. It was as though the very walls were speaking to me, pressing in, closing off any escape. I bolted for the door, fleeing the house. As I ran back into the street, the town felt different, darker, more oppressive. The silence, which had been eerie before, now felt suffocating. It was as if the air itself was trying to smother me. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely perceptible at first, but growing louder with each passing second, the tolling of a bell. The sound was muffled, distant, but unmistakable. It echoed through the empty streets, bouncing off the decaying buildings, reverberating deep in my bones. I followed the sound, my feet moving almost on their own, leading me toward the source. At the far end of the town stood a church, its steeple looming above the rest of the buildings like a watchful sentinel. The bell was coming from there. The doors to the church were wide open, and as I stepped inside, I felt a rush of cold air wash over me. The interior was dark, the pews covered in a thick layer of dust, but the bell continued to toll, each ring sending a shiver down my spine. At the far end of the church, near the altar, stood a figure. They were cloaked in a long, black robe, their back turned to me, completely still. I should have run. I should have left that place and never looked back. But something drew me forward, compelled me to approach. The figure didn't move, didn't turn to acknowledge me. But as I got closer, I could hear a low, rasping voice coming from the shadows. "The town sleeps, but it does not dream." My pulse quickened, my body frozen in place as the figure slowly began to turn. I wanted to flee, but I couldn't. It was as if the silence itself had rooted me to the spot. When the figure faced me, I saw no face, no eyes, no mouth, just an empty black void beneath the hood. "You have heard the silence," the figure said, its voice a hollow rasp. "Now it knows you." The bell tolled again, louder this time, and the figure dissolved into shadow, swirling around me like a storm. The silence pressed in on me from all sides, so thick and heavy that I could barely breathe. The world around me blurred, twisting into strange, impossible shapes. I staggered back, stumbling out of the church, gasping for air. The fog had begun to roll in, thick and suffocating, creeping through the streets like an unseen hand reaching for me. I ran. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to escape. But no matter how far I ran, the town seemed to stretch on forever. The streets twisted and turned in ways that made no sense, looping back on themselves, leading me in circles. Panic set in. I tried to follow the map, but the landmarks didn't match anymore. The buildings were changing, shifting. The whole town seemed alive, moving around me like a maze designed to trap me. I heard the bell again, tolling faintly in the distance, and I knew I had to get out before it rang for me. Finally, after what felt like hours, I found the path back to the forest. The trees loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but they were my only chance. I plunged into the woods, running blindly through the undergrowth. When I finally stumbled out of the forest, my heart pounding, the world felt different. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape, but the oppressive silence was gone. The weight that had been pressing on me had lifted, but the fear remained. I looked back toward the forest, but there was no sign of Black Hollow. It had vanished, as if it had never existed. The map in my hand was blank, just an old, yellowed piece of paper with no markings, no town, nothing. I returned to the map collector's shop, desperate for answers. But when I arrived, the shop was empty. The door was locked, the windows dark. It was as if the map collector had never existed. I tried to forget. I tried to move on. But the silence, it follows me. In the quiet moments, when the world is still, I can feel it creeping back in, pressing down on me, threatening to swallow me whole. The bell tolls in my dreams now, a distant, haunting sound that grows louder with each passing night. I know that one day, I won't be able to escape it. Because the silence of Black Hollow never lets go. Weeks after my escape, I returned to the area with a team of researchers and skeptics, hoping to uncover something, anything, that would prove Black Hollow's existence. Armed with equipment and my story, we ventured deep into the woods, where I had once seen the town. We searched for days, but there was nothing. No buildings, no roads, no sign that a town had ever been there. Frustrated, we turned back, but something strange happened as we left the forest. One of the researchers, Sarah, went missing. One moment she was there, walking just ahead of me on the trail. The next moment, she was gone. No sound, no struggle, just gone. We searched for hours, calling her name, retracing our steps. But she had vanished, as if swallowed by the woods. The team eventually gave up, convinced she had wandered off. But I knew better. The silence had taken her.